Albemarle Regional Transit Authority for our March 27th meeting. And our first item that we always do are introductions. So Ben, would you officially start?
So I'm Ben Chambers. I'm the city's transportation planning manager.
Mike Pruitt, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
Brian Pinkston, City of Charlottesville, City Council.
Taylor Jenkins, Director of Transportation, TJPDC.
And I will add that Christine Jacobs is on the screen with us. She's joining us.
Jacobs, Executive Director, TJPDC, and forgive my remote participation. I'm home with a sick kid. So if my camera goes off, I'm attending to things, but I'll be back as quickly as I can.
Sounds great. All right, Lucinda.
Lucinda Shannon, TJPDC.
Ann Law, I serve as Deputy County Executive.
Diantha McKeel, Albemarle County Board of Supervisors.
Natalie Oshrin, Charlottesville City Council.
Gretchen Thomas, TJPDC.
All right, welcome everybody. We have an agenda before us. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move for adoption of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Brian and a second from Mike. You want to call the vote roll?
Yes. Counselor Pinkston,
Yes.
Counselor Oshrin,
Yes.
Supervisor McKeel,
Yes.
Supervisor Pruitt.
All right.
Oh, it seems like it's not very many.
I know.
I was waiting. Remember that next person, I'm sorry.
And until you get another jurisdiction that has many votes as you're gonna get.
We have draft meeting minutes from our previous meeting and they are in your packet. Did anyone have any corrections or thoughts, or if no one did, I will entertain a motion because we also have to approve the previous meeting minutes.
I motion that we approve the meeting minutes from the previous meeting.
Okay, so we have a motion from Mike. Is there a second? Second from Natalie. You want to call?
Counselor Pinkston,
Yes.
Counselor Oshrin,
Yeah.
Supervisor McKeel.
Yes.
Supervisor Pruitt.
Aye.
This is really nice because it's very quick. All right, so we're good on that. And I want to take the time, I should have done this at the very beginning, to thank Lucinda as well as Gretchen for copies of the Region 10 Transit Governance Study and the Regional Transit Vision. We now have our own copies that we can carry with us and refer to, because we do talk about them all the time.
Yeah.
So Lucinda was so thoughtful in thinking about that, and I really appreciate it. Well, Gretchen.
Lucinda.
You two should share the credit, but I really appreciate it.
It was a joint effort.
We reference them so often, and I really would like to go back and sort of relook at them. So thank you very much. Matters from the public.
If anybody from the public wishes to speak now, you may raise your hand using the raise your hand function on Zoom. We have 3 attendees and no one has raised
Okay.
their hands.
All right. So I guess, Ann, it's your time to shine.
Okay.
Looking at the bylaws, and we all had copies in our packet of the bylaws.
Okay, and I will walk through the changes that the authority members have, the directors have, and then I have one late breaking change.
Oh,
Okay,
Sure.
so what I tried to do is to codify or to put in these bylaws, the changes that we discussed at the last meeting. I'll walk you through those very quickly. Under quorum, I identified that a quorum is represented by at least one director from the city and one director from the county, acknowledging that both entities would have to be present in order to achieve a quorum. That was the first one that I made. We did a little bit of cleaning up on page 4 about voting. You'll see a section that we would indicate voting roll call of all voting members. Additionally, under M on agenda, the change has been made to say that any director that wants to add an item needs to let the chair know no later than 7 days prior to the meeting to include that item on the agenda. And the meeting minutes will be provided pursuant to the Code of Virginia. And what we tried to do going through is to identify the Code of Virginia going through so that we could always be consistent with the Code of Virginia.
And I did notice that one.
Okay.
That was good. Yeah.
That's that portion and. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna just remind you all on that I skipped over this minor change. Page 2, we moved the regular meeting, the organizational meeting to January. It was July, but we felt like January was worked better with the elections. And then if we go further along, we finessed the words on pages 6 and 7 related to membership, identifying that on the finance committee, as well as the technical advisory committee, that we would appoint people who would represent the members of the authority. So it wouldn't be the authority members, wouldn't be all the 4 directors. It would be people that would represent our organizations. And we felt like we needed to clear that up. And I think that's it, except for my late breaking change. So my late breaking change is this: if the directors will recall, there is a section related to audits, item C, which is on page 8, related to the auditor of public accounts. I did a little ferreting around, talked with our legal team as well as the finance, the CFO at the county, and he provided a lengthy email.
It's because he's an attorney.
Right. And basically what it says is that the authority would have to do its own audit. And the audit would be needed when we have funds in excess, financial transactions in excess of $25,000. And that's in section 4. I think it's section 4. I have it identified. I don't saw this and I cannot find it. I specified it. Let me pass this out. So that's in, I'm sorry, section 30. I think I have enough copies, but section 30, 140. So what I've done is change the words to say that we would have an audit conducted as specified by the Code of Virginia.
Great.
Okay, so then we're good, whatever the code requires. And we do the audit, not the auditor of public accounts. Okay.
That was what I
Right.
thought. It
Yeah.
felt like the same thing, but great.
Right. And then the last one is about bonds. I spoke with Jacob about bonds. Again, it's important to point out, we don't have money now, so we don't necessarily have to worry about bonds. When our CFO suggested that we have something in the bylaws related to a bond, if at which the point we would need a bond. And
These are revenue bonds or something.
no, these are bonds on public officials, which is sort of an insurance. I'm weighing into legal. So Supervisor Pruitt, I'm not an attorney, so.
I barely know.
Okay. And so, but sometimes public officials, particularly those that relate to money, will have to have bonds or insurance because they're signing checks and financially responsible, or to ensure that public funds are expended in the appropriate way. And Jacob provided me with some language that was used by Jaunt in their bylaws. But when I went back and looked at our language specifically uses the word may. A bond may be required to give bond payable to the authority, and the authority then would cover the cost of the bond. And so my suggestion is we leave that language alone, and at the point that we need a bond, we'll make sure that we work with TJPDC and any insurance requirements they have, and then require the bonds at that point. Okay, so with that, those should be the only changes to the bylaws.
And let me open it up for questions. So we have C on page 8 is amended, and then the bond section does not need.
Right,
to
does
be
not
amended.
change.
It's just in my head. Any thoughts or questions about the?
Nope, it seems, I thought pretty thoroughly through last
Mhm.
meeting, and this seems reflective of the concerns we had.
Mhm.
I'll remember any concerns we had that aren't. captured in this?
So with that, I'm looking at Natalie because you look like you're still reading. We're not in any hurry. Go ahead and take your time. I don't want to rush you.
No, I'm confident that everything we talked about is fine. But I was just reading.
I'll take a sip of tea.
Okay. Okay,
I'm happy to move the adoption of the amended of the authority bylaws reflecting the amendments that are in this document.
Yeah, as
For our adoption.
okay. Is there a second?
second.
Second by Natalie. Brian made the motion, second by Natalie. So we have a motion to approve the bylaws as presented and as amended. Okay. You want to call for the vote, Lucinda?
Yes. Counselor Pinkston.
Yes.
Counselor Ostrand.
Yes.
Supervisor McKeel.
Yes.
Supervisor Pruitt.
Aye.
All right, so we have agenda item 3 taken care of. Then we're moving to 4.
All right, so this is, we set aside some extra time for this because this is more of a discussion for y'all. You have options for who you'd like to invite to be additional members of the board. We've given you the legislation and what that says about the members of the board. The first part, 33.2/2803, mentions that, you know, governing bodies in the jurisdictions can join the board, but so can agencies, institutions, and facilities wishing to join the board. The next section down lays out sort of the governance terms of the authority and says up to 4 additional directors who shall be non-voting, representing the interests of such agencies, institutions, and facilities described in the thing above can join the authority. So now it's up to y'all to decide who are those members that get invited to join the authority. We have a lot of additional members on our TP that are beyond our elected officials. Which of those would make up the correct mix for those 4 additional members? There's also a bit of oblique reference to UVA in some of the legislation. It's somewhat assumed that they would be a partner at the table. How they participate and how you'd like them to participate is up for discussion. And by that, I mean, what part of UVA needs to be at the table? Does it need to be someone from the president's office? Does it need to be someone from Office of Architect? Does it need to be someone from Parking and Transportation? So there's that sort of question around that big institutional partner. But then there's also questions of, do you want transit agencies at the table? Do you want other stakeholders at the table? Are there other institutions and bodies that you'd like to invite to the table? Are there people who are sitting at the RTP table that you'd like to bring over? So that's sort of an open question for y'all to discuss. We are not anticipating that you're going to vote today and come to a firm decision on who you're bringing. I think we'll talk about that in the next meeting and formally invite people in the next meeting. But this is a time for y'all to discuss that open question.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, absolutely.
Please.
I'm just going to open it up for questions and thoughts.
Before we bring up new ideas, is there anyone here who knows a little bit about the history of adding people to RTP and how those folks were selected? And what considerations went into that?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, and the way I remember it, it was the transit providers. So we had John and Kat, of course, and then we had the surrounding counties, the TJPDC counties. We identified transportation from the University of Virginia. So Becca White, who was the director of transportation at the time at UVA, but she was director of UTS, was at the table.
Parking and Transportation,
Parking,
same job as
yeah,
Scott.
but I mean, you think about it, really UTS.
Yeah.
But was at the table for a good while. They were not voting members. They were just at the table. And then when President Ryan came in, we approached President Ryan and I sat down with President Ryan and I asked if they would please become voting members. And he agreed. And so at that point, Becca became a voting member. She was not a voting member before. Is this helping?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
My concern was always that with a lot going on in transit and in the world and everybody's jobs, there was not a lot of communication from UTS and Becca to the powers that be. So what we found was that the administration folks that dealt with transportation at the university were not aware of what we were doing at the time. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think when we're talking about the university, we need to think higher than just the UTS.
Yeah, I think it should go to,
Yeah.
the request should go. Of course, Colette, she is retiring.
Right.
But in lieu of that, to JJ Davis with a request that, and I think it should be a more kind of full request than just transit. It should talk about like how we want y'all to be partners as we build this authority out. So transit is obviously an essential piece of that, but I think if it's just, I hope they can move beyond just buses and UTS and
Right.
figure out how we can really
Right.
partner.
And to do that, you have to have high enough administrator who can actually make a decision. You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to make the same mistake again. And it's not that Becca didn't do a great job, because she did, but it's really hard to keep other offices apprised. And so I just think we need to think bigger.
But for the other ones, like the non-voting, I'm just looking at the RTP list,
Right.
non-voting members, like the PEC and the hospital are on here. Do they show up and say, hey, can we be on it? Or did we invite them to join? Like how the process of building this roster?
Chip Boyles, who was Christina's predecessor. And Christina, you might be able to add something to this discussion. My old brain is struggling to.
Sure,
But
of
it
course.
seems like we went through and identified the organizations or the groups in Albemarle and Charlottesville that we thought would be good, appropriate. And
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. Of course, all of this was before I was
Yeah.
in this position, but the bylaws of the regional transit partner speak to potential non-voting membership as well. So it says in the RTP's bylaws that non-voting members may be comprised of, and then it has a long list of anything from transit providers, health system, the university, environmental groups, the Chamber of Commerce, the MPO. So I think at the time that the bylaws were adopted, there was a vision to have a large non-voting body. But I think as the RTP came into its own and the work that was being done, a lot of those folks were attending as guests, but weren't necessarily added to the board as non-voting members. There were a couple, just as I was coming on board, my predecessor, that did petition the board to join. And at that time, the partnership did agree to allow, I believe it was Piedmont Environmental Council and Peter from the Charlottesville Area Alliance. Those folks were allowed to join at the board's approval.
And we did have several of those groups, for example, that really didn't participate. So because it just wasn't in their wheelhouse, right? So we thought it would be, and it turned out that it wasn't. And I think specifically Martha Jefferson Hospital.
They can always like be invited to participate or to join us.
Sure.
Yeah, sort of wondering, maybe this is what Natalie's getting at. What are the criteria of what we want these for?
Mhm.
Is it sort of institutional reach or the kind of work they do, or whether they're with the state government or John? There were some ones that people feel are obvious. University feels obvious to me, and John feels obvious to me.
Yeah.
But I don't know how others feel.
Well, there's also a consideration you need to make of the difference between the RTP and the CARTA.
Right.
RTP didn't have any money, and eventually we would like our CARTA to be a conduit for money. Do you want the people who are receiving that money to be sitting on the board helping you make decisions about that money or not? So that might have some implications for John to work for CAT.
But they're not voting.
But they're not voting, and they are also they have spoken with us about, how are we supposed to be integrated into this system? Like, what is our role here? And that could be a way you define that role.
Yeah.
Or define it opposite of that and say, you're not supposed to be in here, but we're still connected in some other way.
throwing this out again, thoughts.
And then also just for some context, you know, that as we were doing the governance study, we were also looking at the existing authorities within the Commonwealth and authorities outside of the Commonwealth to look at what their governance structure was. And so we did a review of a lot of their membership. So it's important to keep in mind, we all know this, but I feel like stating it again, that we are a transit authority, but the membership of some of those other authorities can inform some of the discussion that you have. So for example, in Central Virginia, their authority has members of both, you know, a voting member from the House of Delegates, from the Senate, from the Commonwealth Transportation Board, but then they have a whole list of ex officio non-voting membership that includes, you know, the Department of Rail Public Transportation, or, you know, from the Commissioner of Highways, the Port Authority, the airport. So theirs is a much more comprehensive list because it's including all modes of transportation versus just a transit authority. So I'm just putting that out there as just a reference point for the types of things you might want to be discussing or thinking about.
And for the director's information in Appendix E of the governance study are the bylaws from the other authorities that would list, to Christine's point, would list who some of those other ex officio members are. So Appendix E, Appendix F are is the actual legislation, and Appendix E are the bylaws.
42, page 42 seems consolidated into a table.
Thank you.
The other point that I'll make about John, while y'all are looking through, is currently RTP has 3 members from John's. It has a rural, an urban, and then the CEO.
Right.
You'd have to make some determination of who would be appropriate if you decided John was one of the members you'd like to.
Like every Virginia-based one has included DRPT as a non-voting member.
Yeah.
And most have included VDOT,
And
which were the 2 that came to my mind.
And I would agree with that. I think they're value added, without a doubt.
I would just observe that UVA jaunt as one member. DRPT and VDOT would fill our possible slots.
And we came up with the number 4 with what intention?
That's in legislation.
What was in
Oh, this legislation?
Gives
We
you,
have to-
Okay.
gives you up to 4.
Right,
And
and
we
we
have to do, to Ben's point, you don't have to do 4, it gives you up to 4.
and we also know that we may very well have the need to go back to the General Assembly to change.
that.
Yeah, so we could do that if we felt like, yeah. And so I don't want that to be, in the future, we could certainly ask the General Assembly to change.
Yeah, I
We may
think
have
what
a-
it comes down to is, yeah, sorry, Diane, I think there's a delay. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think what it comes down to is in the next 6, 12, 18 months, who are critical members that are going to help inform your decisions in establishing this board? And then at a future date, once the board is operating and we know the direction that it's taking, then a review of that legislation is going to be necessary to say what kind of changes are we going to need before we're seeking funding, or alongside while we're seeking funding. So I think this is almost like a short term to fill what's within our enabling authority right now.
I do feel like we're gonna have to. Are we thinking RTP is gonna sunset?
Yes, eventually. We won't need both. We'll just,
Like in the next 18 months?
Right. well, maybe sooner. We said certainly 8 to 9 months.
Because if we're wanting, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking if we're wanting to duplicate,
Right.
go ahead and keep planning to duplicate parts of those functions. And I guess, for example, we can always invite Garland to be here. And I feel like with Natalie and I, we're representing the city, which is. And it feels like the university. This is the right way to put it, but I want to say better horse. I mean, I don't know how they really feel about this whole thing, but it seems like they're certainly a large enough. You know, they are the largest employer and I think having them, it seems like non-voting member is the best option unless we just invite them and see if they come. And I don't know if there's any problem with inviting John. I mean, they're also another critical partner. Like I mentioned with Garland, we could just ask him to be here and he can give his feedback to us directly. I don't know about DRPT and VDOT as much. I would defer to you all. on
Well,
that.
I don't think VDOT needs to be at the beginning. I think that's a seat that I don't think, but later, as we're going through this, we may find that we need their advice or their work, but I do think DRPT could be value added.
Yeah, I think
That's
both,
what my thought was.
I think both on the question of what's the sunset timeline for our RTP and the question of, you know, can we add more members? Who are those additional members that we want to identify in the out years when we're doing changes to the legislation? I think that really depends on what the changes to the legislation look like this round and how successful we are getting those through the legislature.
Right.
We have a better idea probably next February of what that shape looks like, but right now we're starting with this guy.
I will also just add, I think I'm hearing, maybe I'm reading into it, but I feel like I'm hearing some concern about Kat is currently a non-voting member of the RTP. Are we losing expertise by not carrying Kat over as a voting member? Just thinking, we had this back and forth last time about what even the language means in our bylaws. I would say that Charlottesville is a member, right? Y'all are not members. Charlottesville is a member. And in that capacity, Garland or anyone from CAT are natural persons who can be representatives of a member of the board, right? So they can serve on, for example, the finance committee as a member of the finance committee, because they are a person who is a member, who is part of a member. And they could very much be in the room, I think.
I think that's right too. Ben's.
Yeah, I mean,
yes, yeah.
we're open to the public, so they can be in the room.
Yeah,
in
and I
any
think that's
capacity.
something that if you could go ahead and communicate back to Sam.
Okay.
That would be our expectation.
Okay.
Along the lines of what I just stated.
So what I'm hearing is that we would definitely have Kat would be at the table, but not as a voting member. Is that what I'm hearing, or would be invited?
They would at least be
Invited as to
be in the room.
be in the
Yeah.
room.
We actually did put the invite out to the transit agencies to join us at this meeting, and we also said might be a little uncomfortable if we're talking about whether you get to join or not.
Okay.
So in the future, I think they do expect to participate and to show up and be active in this, but they are a little uncertain about what their role is supposed to be and are hoping to get some definition from y'all on that.
And if they show up as as not non-voting members, but just people in the room.
Then we, basically the difference is they're not at the table and in the discussion unless they get called to the table.
Right,
for
so
a
yeah,
specific
that was my
point.
question, is
Yeah.
like, how do we involve, is there like, is it the same rules as like, okay, public comment period, and then the Garland has to say something, or can we like talk to
No,
him like normal?
It's more of like, think of MPO policy board. I sit in the back row,
Yeah,
but you guys sometimes need me to answer a question and you pull me up and I answer a question, then I
Yeah.
go sit back down. Like that sort of function is what they're looking at. The back row wouldn't be that far. It's right there. So
Yeah, I'm just trying to think this through because we do have other authorities. Like the MBO, we have the, the Water and Sewer Authority, we have the Airport Authority, just trying to figure out how they're structured a little bit as we're having this discussion.
Right.
I just feel like we should sort of err on the side of fewer rather than more
Because we can always add.
as we start. I don't know how y'all feel about it.
Yeah.
There is-
Inclination I have, let's just invite everybody.
There's an efficiency to small groups,
Yeah.
right? I'm of the opinion at the end of the day, everything gets accomplished by 1 to 2 people, just actually knuckling down in a small room.
well, and the other thing to consider is you're the voting members. These members are supposed to supplement the discussion. Who is going to help you make decisions as voting members? Who's going to fill in the gaps for you with the information that you're going to need to be contributing to that discussion?
So that's helpful to have. So Kat could be as in the room, but not at the table. And I would say the same thing for John. Because it would seem like to me that what we do for one of those, we would do for it just would make sense, right?
can I ask a question just to make sure we're on the same page? It's going to sound fundamental, but I want to make sure we're all thinking about the same thing. When we're talking about needing input and decisions that we're making, what are the decisions that we're going to be making that we're going to need input on?
So, great question. And help me with this a little bit, but one thing we'll be deciding about is our funding stream,
Mhm.
where the funding comes from. We would also be I would think we would be deciding on or prioritizing projects.
Yes, we have.
So those to me are
hopefully
the
a grant coming
biggies.
forward.
So you all would be prioritizing city projects. We'd be prioritizing perhaps Albemarle County projects, right?
Well, I think
Within
the idea is.
Is regional.
At this
But it's
table, we are
regional, but
Yeah.
I'm just
doing
saying,
it
because you would
together,
know
yeah.
more about yours. But so we're prioritizing projects and funding. Those are the two big ones.
Those are gonna be two big efforts that you'll
Yeah.
be taking on this year. Yeah.
What would be something, you all have any thoughts on other?
Honestly, that's gonna take up most of your time.
And Christine, feel free to jump in here as we're talking.
Yeah, you guys are gonna be also very much involved in the strategy for going before the General Assembly and the timeline and what the ask is gonna be, you know, what consensus you have with your own jurisdictions on what revenue sources you're gonna be looking at, but then ultimately, if and when an authority gets funded, you're gonna be the ones making the decisions on where the
Right.
funding goes once it's received.
Right.
So, you know, the methodology for scoring projects, for identifying who gets the funding, so that's longer into the future, but that is what this board's responsibility will be.
I would also think a core part of what we're going to have to do is think through how existing services and service platforms are going to be combined, right? Like, especially if we're thinking about funding, right? Don't we have to have that open discussion that we've been kind of dancing around about how we engage with UVA as a part of this transit ecosystem? I know, I think almost every elected in this room has pointed out before that combining UVA into a single transit provider service increases our federal dollar pull down. I know I've talked about that because it's a sexy thing to talk about. But if that's going to play into how we think about our funding, then we need to have that conversation as part of our development of a legislative program, right? Because that becomes essential to what kind of ask we're making to the GA.
Is that something that we would have to ask GA for permission for to do, to absorb?
I don't think
No,
so,
I don't think
but I'm
so.
just, I'm saying,
No.
it strikes me as that has to be a first conversation because that informs what kind of money.
Right, it's the narrative of what
So,
we're building and asking for,
I
yeah.
would say, and I think we have had, the city has had an initial conversation with Colette in her office about the possibility of merging at least some of the routes. And you were there.
Mhm.
I don't think there's been any follow-up from that. So some of these are hard conversations that are gonna have to be handled. I don't want to say behind closed doors, that's not what I'm trying to say, but I think, you know, face to face with some of these.
Sensitively.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah.
Versus bringing them in here and then, you know, making them take
Yeah.
a bear.
I agree.
Yeah.
Not that we should like pull our punches, but we just have to be thoughtful about how we're doing it, I guess, but. I think that is a huge thing on if someone's keeping a list, I mean, the things you mentioned are important things on the list, I think that's a huge thing on the list. Seeing if, you know, really pinning down the university about what they're willing to commit to, if their response is, well, we're just not willing to commit right now, then that's an answer for now, and we move forward.
Well, and when you decide to name members, you may also give us direction of, here's how you'd like us to engage them. And it may be different for different agencies. It may be, hey, UVA, you need to go have a meeting with them in quiet and figure out what their interest is in joining this board before they formally are asked to join the board. But with some of the other ones, you know, they may say yes immediately and be totally cool with being on your board and know what they're going to get out of it. Whereas UVA, I think that there's probably more discussion that you need to have.
And if you really look at some of the models, like we went to Champaign Urbana where they have just a big umbrella, right? Or Blacksburg, looking at those models, but they're not authority. So I'm not really talking about that. I'm just talking about getting the systems together. Because as Mike said, we really need the university. We need that population, if at all possible, because it really helps us pull down funding.
Yeah.
At least in the past, it's helped us pull down.
I would caution though that the folding of transit agencies is not absolutely necessary
Right,
for you
I'm-
to start pulling down
Yeah,
state allowed funding
Right,
sources. You could set that up and then start doling out the money to 3 different transit agencies based on what priorities they're serving for you based on this regional transit vision plan.
yeah. And then I think more about it, that we have 3 transit agencies or 4, however you want to count it. But I think about this as more being under an umbrella, as not a merging necessarily, but being under an umbrella, if that makes sense.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. Because I think you start talking about merging them and everybody's hair
Everybody-
on fire and they say, yeah, we're really
Well,
not
catches
talking about
money and-
merging. We're talking about putting them under an umbrella, right?
It is important to point out that this isn't something that the directors have to decide tonight. Right? Nobody has to decide tonight. You could come back and say, and next month or in 2 months, you could say, we want to add 1 member and we're going to agree it's ABC. Right? And then a couple months later, you could add another one. The bylaws don't require that you add 4. You can add up to 4 and you all can decide on the timing of that.
Let me ask, rather than inventing the wheel, are there any transit authority? I thought when we received the presentation last month, there were several communities that had a transit authority. Not many, but several were there, not Christine. And I'm just wondering
There were a couple.
what they look like. It would be interesting what their membership is like.
Yeah, there are a couple transit funds that share, I think HRTC has one.
This is that big chart.
I
Yeah,
remember, I
Yeah.
thought Danny presented, and remember we had that big from Danny, and I thought there were 2, no more than 3 for sure, that were authorities perhaps that were not transportation, but just transit. And I was
Yeah, an
just-
example I can give is the Williamsburg area. Their transit authority. So they've got, a board of directors, but they've also got a group of advisors, where they've got their foundation, they've got their university, they've got DRPT. So similar to what we've been talking about, at least that one example. There's others we can.
That's what I was getting at, Christine, trying to figure out if there were several that were actually working, right, and up and running, and what they look like. And that's a good example because they have a university too. That community has a
Since
university.
my recommendation would be that, we informally, and maybe it's the chair and vice chair. It's great to be able to. across the
We're
table.
smiling.
Maybe not some binding resolution, but some sort of general acceptance that it would be a good thing to perhaps piggyback off what Sam Sanders and Jeff Richardson are doing with the university right now to talk about areas of common interest and to elevate this as something that we would like to talk about. And there are town conversations that are happening.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
Yeah,
so I'm happy to go instead if one of you would prefer.
yeah.
But I think setting up some time to meet directly with either Colette or with Ms. Davis would be something that we should do sooner than later. Because they may very well not even know that we're doing this.
Right.
maybe we could look to set that up as part of
Why
the
don't we
town
do
and gown
that? I think the
discussions.
town and gown and have it around, because we've had one discussion with.
It'd be good to have some follow-up.
Yeah, we'll go back and
Make
have
sure
a
you check in
follow-up.
with Sam first.
Yeah.
And I would be interested in, we see the list of what everyone else has included and we're like, oh, okay, everyone's doing it. But to actually have
Mhm,
this is why, this is what they contribute.
mhm.
This is, to actually talk about and break down the rationale for including those, just so it's spelled out and clear and we're all not.
Yeah, and I don't think there were but a couple. We're not talking about 6 or 7.
Right, yeah, it's
Right,
like they all have DRPT, and a lot of them have
Yeah.
VDOT, and William and Mary does show up in the Williamsburg one, which makes sense. But then they don't have VDOT because they can only have 2, so. Yeah, it'd be just like a little pros and cons list for each of them would be useful.
So how would we get that?
We'd have to do the work.
We'd have to call them and talk to them. I mean,
Well, I mean, it's just
Or we
like
just,
that-
we just
I'm just
brainstorm,
curious.
or we could just brainstorm here and, you know.
Was it the sort of thing we could ask staff to make a recommendation? Or is that putting off on them work we should be doing?
I think I'll just speak for the group. I think the group, we could make a recommendation. I don't think we wanted to make a recommendation unless y'all asked for it.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
That makes sense. That makes me feel better.
And then
But
we
once asked, it's
Why not?
okay, okay.
when what's his name, Danny?
Danny,
Danny. Yeah.
I found that spreadsheet that he sent out. So if, I will forward this email to everybody, so you have it, because in that spreadsheet, they talk about transit related agencies and those that have, that are more than just transit. So you can see that as
And
well.
going back to that, because there were just 2 or 3. I
Right,
thought, and-
right. It looks, right. Some are
Yeah.
funds, some are,
Be
so,
interested in what, like, subject matter experts, like everyone else in the room here except for me, what y'all would think. Hey, I think this would be really important, maybe to Natalie's point, just a couple of reasons why. I don't want to like tax everyone's time, but.
But your thoughts with your recommendation is what I'm hearing, right?
And, you know, beyond, if you have ones beyond these, this handful, you know, like alliances, health districts, whatever. That
Some
might
groups
be
like
useful.
CAT, for example, maybe there's this other bucket of people that are in the room but not at the table, whatever you wanna call it.
Invitees of some sort, yeah.
Yeah, the peanut gallery.
Yes.
Uh,
Hey, Katie? The RPT, I'm just curious about your thoughts. Do you have any thoughts about,
Katie and
she's,
Grant are both there. You have, I will allow them both to talk.
yeah.
Oh,
It'd be
no, there's
interesting just to
Katie.
hear. There's Katie.
Can you,
Do they have to be promoted to participants first or panelists?
I was allowing them to
Okay.
talk.
Hey, can you guys hear me? This is Grant.
Yes, this is Grant. Okay, you're hearing our conversation, I think.
Yes.
Just trying to get a sense of your all's thoughts as the DRPT representatives, right?
Yeah, so I kind of anticipated this, seeing the agenda. So I had a chance to talk to some of our leadership about it. We're happy to, I guess, participate in CARTA as a non-voting member, just to share our expertise with transit funding at the federal, state level. Happy to do that. We essentially play that role with the Williamsburg Area Transit Authority right now. We attend all of those board meetings, and I think we add value. Certainly feel free to reach out to them to confirm
I think
that.
you were value added, so.
Yeah, but I'll also, feelings won't be hurt if you guys leave us out. We want to be able to provide you value. I would have some hesitations though if we were a voting member. We'd probably have to really think hard about that. But if right now the thought is a non-voting member, I think we're totally on board with that.
Yeah, right. That helps a lot. Thank you. Katie, did you want to say anything? Maybe she's. Yeah.
Nope, I think Grant kind of covered everything.
Okay,
Sorry.
just didn't want to leave you out. All right,
I appreciate that.
yeah, so that's good.
Right,
So that's helpful, yeah. So we have, I think what we've asked then is for staff to go away and come back to us with a recommendation and some thoughts about the pros and cons of what they were thinking about those recommendations. Doesn't have to be exhaustive, but and is it reasonable for you all to be able to do that by, so our next meeting is the RTP, the following month. So that's, is that reasonable for the next meeting, our next meeting here?
Yeah, and I think knowing that UVA is a partner that we'll probably be moving forward with in some capacity, we'll go ahead and get those discussions engaged at our executive levels. So
Yeah.
that
Which is
can-
what
we can
Brian was
figure out,
referencing, so that's good. So that's 2 pieces to the puzzle.
Yep.
Is that helpful?
Yes, that's right. So.
And is that what we need then? Okay.
And I have one more thing just for the group to think on and consider. The way the bylaws are written, so Pat would be represented already by Charlottesville by the members that are already voting.
Mhm.
John, if they were to participate in the technical advisory committee, finance committee, they would have to be a non-voting member to be able to participate in that capacity on technical advisory, finance. If that was something we would want their input on,
Yeah.
in those, they would have to be a non-voting member. So I just wanted to put that out there to make sure that distinction.
That we
was
didn't miss
understood.
that point.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Deborah.
The
That's really
subcommittees
important.
require that
Yeah,
persons be
yeah,
members.
that's very important. Good point.
Okay, that's good too.
And we had the pleasure of having Grant be here. We don't have somebody from VDOT, so I'd like to have some further conversations on whether VDOT at this stage is the appropriate role. I mean, there's certainly, I can think of a ton of reasons for and a ton of reasons for not at this point. So I think staff can do some more background on that before making a recommendation on that in particular.
Yeah, and that's fine, yeah. I think, I'm thinking further down the road, but that's okay. Let's take a look at it and see.
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind is, transit agencies are eligible applicants for Smart Scale. It just isn't, they don't typically go after it, but there's another avenue for that. They can do that, by engaging in the MPO, by engaging directly with VDOT. So certainly want to put some more thought into that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, so we just finished
Yeah, I think so.
the non-voting discussion, right? The additional non-voting
First.
directors.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just thought of one really dumb additional closing thought on this. If we feel constrained by 4, which I'm not saying we are, but if that is a thing that we feel constrained by it, if we do not want to rejigger the wheel, you could do the kind of thing that people do with corporate structures all the time, where we appoint the RTP as a member. Which would allow us to access
We could
every single
pull
person who's a
everybody
member of the
in the-
RTP.
That's an interesting
If
thing.
we wanted those persons on.
That's your attorney, Brett.
And I'm not saying the RTP should be the member, but like something like that, right?
Because you could pull in anybody from the RTP you wanted.
Yes.
Which you have to
Yeah.
do, but if we dissolve the RTP, then
Then
that
you'd
would
be
be a
screwed, you have to have a
problem.
different organization.
We could not
But-
solve it.
Then you could have a reason to keep the RTP.
That's right.
Yeah, so.
It's interesting.
And I'm not saying that's even prudent, I think 4 is probably, sometimes limits are good. But I just raised that. for
There's
It's
a
interesting.
strategy
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
to consider.
All right,
Hmm.
very good. All right, so I think our next item then, Ann, is a regular meeting resolution, am I correct?
Yeah, and fortunately, the staff at TJPDC, Lucinda, drafted a resolution. So the resolution in front of the directors today officially designates the 4th Thursday of every other month as the meeting time at 5 o'clock at the TJPDC office as the time, the date, and the location for the meetings for CARTA. And the bylaws that you all just approved have said, you're gonna designate regular meeting times by resolution. It does also, as you'll note, say that we're gonna operate in accordance with Virginia Freedom of Information Act. We'll advertise it. There'll be certain opportunities to go into closed session per the Code of Virginia, and that there'll be appropriate notice given to the public.
Right.
So I would just ask the board if they have any questions, and if not,
And I would thank you, Christine, for doing that.
Lucinda.
Lucinda.
Lucinda, I'm sorry, I thought you said Christine, it was Lucinda, great. So this is excellent.
I do.
Yeah,
Christine, do you want to go ahead?
no, please do.
My question is, it says, 4th Thursday every other month. Do we need to specify starting in January?
We can do that. Well, why don't we say, starting in May,
Yeah.
starting in
Right.
May.
Yeah,
we'll
starting in
say-
May, but
Starting in May.
reflecting that it's
Okay.
January, then March, then.
Right, starting in
That works.
May,
So you have a baseline. Yeah.
May
that's good.
2025.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's good. All right, any other comments or additions or? Thank you. Yeah, that was a good catch.
I would move this resolution to establish regular meetings of the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Transit Authority as provided in your packet with the amendment just made.
All right, is there a second?
Can I ask one more
No,
question?
that's fine. We're under.
Sorry.
Okay.
Do we need to, I know this is in the bylaws for virtual meetings. Do we need to include any virtual meeting information here?
that would be covered.
Sorry, I was talking through a mute. We will have to have a separate policy for you
Yeah.
all on the virtual meetings policy. We have one that we standard use for the PDC, but we'll adapt it for you all and bring that back to you at a future date.
And we would not need to include anything
In the
about that
scheduling
this
resolution.
particular one.
Okay, great, then second.
Okay. So we now have a motion by Brian and a second by Natalie. Could you please call,
Yeah.
vote?
Supervisor,
And then remember, it's as amended, so, yeah.
Supervisor McKeel,
Yes.
Supervisor Oshrin. Your city council.
Okay.
Supervisor, Pruitt
Aye.
and Counselor Pinkston.
Yes.
All right. We're moving right along. So Ben, I'm looking back to you for, I like the way you are. typing.
Yeah, we're
This is
taking
good.
care of this, so we're
Yeah.
not all swamped with one thing. So the next thing before you is the public comment policy. Pretty simple. We are allowing members of the public to speak for up to 3 minutes to the board. Up to 10 members may speak during the comment period, first come, first served basis. You can only speak at one public comment period per meeting. And once the public comment period begins, the sign up for that public comment is closed. We do give some guidelines that are associated with the public comment. Oh, I kind of skipped over. You can sign up by email, you can call in. You can also participate through Zoom or in person, provided there are
Right.
slots available. We also gave some guidelines that sort of direct people that this is to provide comment to the board. This is not a dialogue between you and the board. This is to provide information to the board and then let
These
them
all
have a
look very
discussion.
familiar to me.
Yeah, so you may be familiar with these.
Yes.
All the comments we are saying will be live streamed, recorded and published on TJPDC's website. And then we ask folks to silence their phones when they come to.
And
give a
actually,
public
that's a nice
comment.
addition. I noticed that. That's good, especially in a little small space like this. So
I think device is misspelled, but.
device, yeah, it is.
The British.
It's a C as opposed to a, it'd be a C, yeah, device. So we'll
Um,
get that.
I,
You can see where it is.
at the very bottom in bold.
Oh, yeah.
At city council, we have public comments at the beginning, then we have the whole meeting, then we have public comments at the end. Do we need that?
Mm-mm.
Do you have that at
We
town
do
meetings
not.
also?
Well, we have 2 periods of public comment because we have our meetings are broken into 2 halves, before and after the closed session.
So we have a public comment for each session,
Section,
one
okay.
for each session.
We just have ours in the second one and it's before and after.
I'll note that this policy does not dictate how many public comments you get. We do that through the agenda. So if
Okay.
the chair and vice chair want to add or subtract the number of public comments, as long as we have one, we're covered.
Uh-huh.
But if you want to add 5 more on there, go for it. That's up to
Yeah.
you.
I think this is fine.
Yeah.
But let me ask a quick question. Will we ever have public hearings?
No.
I don't, I'm just, I mean, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, but
I would imagine that at some point, if there were long-term financing, bonds, anything like that, you might have to have public hearing, but you would not need public hearing to allocate funds, right? If with a budget, there potentially might need with a budget with resources, potentially you might need a public hearing.
There was, the TJPDC earlier this year had to do something as a public hearing, I think. I mean, it was a non-event because no
Yeah,
one's
no
showing
showed
up,
up.
but
Right.
if you
Well-
had a public hearing, you would want to have a public comment. You would obviously have another public.
So your public
Yeah.
hearing would be, the requirements of that would be dictated by the
Oh,
public.
differently.
Those
Yeah,
are-
that's a whole
There's a whole
different
different law
But
that
it
deals with
made,
that.
your comment made me think about public hearings.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I was talking about, and
Yeah.
there's usually not anyone at the end, but sometimes people who do stick around for the whole meeting are like, that was cool for that thing, or.
Yeah.
Well, what's important also to note is a public hearing then is required to go into the newspaper, like there's a whole different.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a
advertisement.
whole,
Yeah,
that
but
already.
But
comment.
her comment made me think about public hearings and I thought,
Yeah.
well, maybe we're gonna be having some public hearings eventually. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
could happen
Yeah.
actually.
We
Yeah.
hope so. We hope that
Yeah.
there would be a reason to have a
Mhm.
public hearing. That'd be a good thing.
3 minutes has just been the standard forever.
Yeah, I think most, yeah. Is that okay? We have said
Two is
sometimes,
always.
well, we can move it to two. I don't have a problem with that. We at the county,
One meet, it seems like there is a board that I'm on that has a 2 minute.
Wow.
We
I don't
saw,
know, I'm partly being.
I think our
facetious,
rules
but-
allow us to exercise the discretion to
depending on how
go
many
to
people,
two if there's a lot.
yeah. But that's for public hearings for the most part,
Yeah, because I think
because we limit
Yeah.
this number of speakers.
We could say 2 minutes and then allow more speakers.
No, I think 3 minutes is fine. I'm just trying to think of what is the 2 minute thing, because that's ringing a bell in my head too. It doesn't matter. I mean, 3 minutes is consistent with everything else we do.
y'all don't do if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, you get more time saying, do you? I know some places.
we
do
did see that come up when we were pulling these together and saw one that said, 5 minutes if you're a recognized organization, but we thought that might get out of hand, given the number of
And we used
people
to
who
have that
show
when I
up
was on the
saying-
school board, but you had to call in and schedule that with the clerk ahead of time so that it was organized.
Is it the
Not
school
just a
board
drop
that says
in.
2 minutes?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so 3 minutes is.
So are we good with this then
Yeah.
for right now?
Devise.
Yeah, so
That means to give to someone on death. Devise.
So is this just an edit? This is not as amended. This is just an edit, right? I mean.
The old
we-
scrivener had an error.
It's an edit, right? So we don't have to say as.
Which is why it
amended.
wouldn't have been read underlined. It has a
it is a word, yeah.
So I've sort of lost track. Do we have a motion and a second on this one?
Yes.
We did. Okay.
Motion.
So Brian had made a motion and
I didn't move it.
I thought
Not
you
yet,
moved it.
but I will, so moved.
So moved. Okay, second, there we go. So we've switched now. Natalie is making the motion and Brian was seconding. Would you call the vote, please? Who's that?
Sorry, Counselor Pinkston,
Yes.
Counselor Oshman,
Yes.
Supervisor McKeel,
Yes.
Supervisor Pruitt.
Yes. Okay. That's voted twice. Fine. I wasn't thinking very clearly. All right, so we have yours been taken care of. We're on to other business updates and reminders. I don't have any if anyone else does. Oh, there's a hand up. Christine.
This is such a small thing, I'm almost embarrassed to bring it up and that I didn't notice it earlier, but for the resolution for the meetings, it specifically says 401 Water Street. I would love it if you all would take action to say 401 or 407, because if we begin to have public and non-voting members, we're gonna want to be able to be in the Water Street Center. And the address of the Water Street Center is 407.
So that is, let me go back to the.
We could just say at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission and not put an address in.
Yeah, whatever the board is happy with. I just caught that teeny little detail that 401 is typically only half of our building, technically.
Yeah,
So we
and
can,
that's under number one is what we're looking at.
can they move that as just a separate amendment to the resolution?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's your
So-
preference to use though?
So in the third whereas, it says at such a time and place as we may determine. And then below it gives that specific thing. So do we need that specific thing at all?
Have a place not, frequently, that once per quarter at a place to be determined by the chair or at such time and place as shall, yeah. May determine.
I think that's the language directly from the legislation. Is that right,
Mhm.
Lucinda?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I would think we would want to establish a location for the regular meetings, and if there was some special meeting that required a larger venue, we could notice it that way to be somewhere else. You know, and I would think that we're gonna say we're gonna be at the TJPDC offices, or to your point, Councilor Oshman, leave it open. I just want the public to know where those meetings are gonna be, and if it's left vague. I mean, I guess they look at our website and stuff.
0.1 to be, regularly held meetings will be at 401, 407 East Water Street or noticed elsewhere.
Yes.
I like that.
Great.
Okay. Is that,
Sure, so do we need to vote on that, I
You want to
guess?
say that in the form of a motion?
So move what I just said.
I got it. It's
Okay.
Seconded.
So our fast hypos has it,
Yeah.
and we're good. So if you'll call for the vote on that.
Supervisor McKeel,
Yes.
Supervisor Pinkston,
Yes.
Counselor Oshra.
Yes.
Counselor. Oh,
It's fine. Hi.
We're abusing you today because I'm trying to vote for you. Okay. All right, so other business by anybody? That was great, Christine. Good catch. Thank you, dearie. Anything else from anybody looking around? And with that, then I will adjourn our meeting or this meeting to what would be the date? I'm sorry, Lisa. Lisa, if you have a date. So it's gonna be May, but I just don't have.
May
a calendar.
22nd. May 22nd.
May 22nd.
It's a fourth
Oh.
Thursday.
Yes, May 22nd.
May, so I'm adjourning us to May 22nd, 2025. And we will be next at that meeting 5 o'clock
Yes.
as opposed to 4, which we switched up today. So 5 o'clock. That's lovely. And you guys can go to your budget meeting.
It just occurred to me while I was sitting here and I emailed a bunch of
Thanks.
people, so I had my work phone out. HUD's website is getting mostly destroyed tomorrow.